Number 10, spider art. I have to start our list off with NASA's 1995 spider tests. I was always afraid of spiders growing up, and once I heard about this, it kind of helped out. So I don't know, maybe I'll help you as well. When nature meets science, we often get jarring results, be it hybrid animals, clones, you name it. Spiders, as fascinating as they already are, can be even more mysterious, believe it or not, especially when they're exposed to mind-altering illicit substances. NASA wanted to determine the toxicity between these substances and what differences they may look like in use. So spiders, being as fascinating as they are, we can see how they think and survive with their webs. We see it up close, when we accidentally walk through them and we go, ew. But we never see them like this, right? Caffeinated behavior is all over the place, right? It doesn't even look like a normal web at all. But with hallucinogens, it's the same shape, but it's almost missing steps. I don't think any animal should have coffee. I don't think an espresso goes well with a bug. Or human, really. Number 9, the turkey fake-out. This next one here is pretty funny, I had to include it. Back in the 1960s, turkey biologists in Pennsylvania thought, what if a male turkey was in a room with a fake turkey? What would happen, right? Would he try and flirt, right? Let's see what happens. Would he I am legend this fake turkey and just continue on living like everything's normal? Yes, turns out the answer is yes. These male turkeys would actually try and mate with the fake turkey, but by the end of the tests, they just had a head of a turkey on a stick. A fake turkey also, that'd be horrible. But these dudes still came out like, hey, what's going on, you single? Even though it was a stick with a photo of a turkey. These guys had no idea. How funny is that? They were just slowly taking away parts of a real turkey, and these dudes were coming out still with the same game plan, with the same keys to the VIP plan to get with that turkey, even though it's a broom. Number 8, Zorse. It's a fun one to say, let's do it. Zorse, it's a great word, Zorse. Male zebra, female horse. Now we get a really fun word, the Zorse. Sounds like a god, Thor, Odin, and Zorse. Zebroids are also quite common historically. See, Charles Darwin even noted some in his early work. So since the 19th century, crossbreeding zebras with horses or donkeys, it's all been done. More often than not, and this is what makes them stand out, zebroids will experience dwarfism. Yeah, they're quite cute, I can't lie. In 2010, a zedonk was born, a zebra donkey. But again, back in the 70s, 3 were born in Colchester Zoo. Yeah, way back then. Probably forgot about that. These zookeepers were like, how do we make the zoos new and hip? Oh, I have an idea. Yeah, bizarre. Humans aren't too smart. Let's stop mixing animal DNA. We get pretty jarring results all the time, I think. Number 7, inner armor. All right, let's change it up a little bit, shall we? DARPA's Inner Armor Project. This was the Pentagon's way of creating super soldiers. Yeah, and Marvel Phase 5 or whatever, couldn't be a better time to bring this out. Scientists use animals as a reference for these new abilities, like literally from a Marvel movie. They're studying the DNA of the stellar sea lion because it can reduce blood flow away from organs if need be in order to reduce oxygen demand to survive. Yeah, that's like a superpower. We gotta figure that out. That would be sweet. Just Aquaman with a tactical vest? Okay, sure, let's do it. Dr. Michael Callahan, who is in charge of running the operation, says that the goal is to make soldiers kill-proof against disease, chemical weapons, radioactive weapons, harsh weather conditions, you name it, all that stuff. Now, this was back in 2007, and then later in 2014, Barack Obama just came out of nowhere and announced that the United States is working on building Iron Man. Yeah, apparently that wasn't a joke. Number 6, the Milgram Experiment. All right, we gotta turn it up a little bit, shall we? While learning about our past in further detail, like the Trinity Test, for example, and how that led to the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's important to understand why these things happened and how people like the Germans were so easily influenced into doing what they did. So the Milgram Experiment was put in place to start getting some ideas, right? How far will people go when it comes to obeying instructions, specifically if it involves a third party being hurt? Stanley Milgram, Yale psychologist, he created this test, and there's 3 important rules for this one. There's the teacher, the experimenter, and the learner. The learner is disguised as the main test subject, but they're really in on the whole thing. The real subject is actually the teacher, the one administering pain to the test subject. Yeah, they're told by this higher figure, whatever, to keep upping the pain every time they get a question wrong. So the real test is to see how far humans will go when hurting others. The icing on this experiment, of course, is that the subject isn't actually getting shocked at all. These tests were underway in 1961 in a basement at Yale University. Imagine taking the wrong turn on your way to class, you end up here. It's terrible. Number 5, go pills. Okay, look out, 5-hour energy. We're pulling an all-nighter for this one. Every time I watch Lord of the Rings, I fall asleep. I can't help it. It's a lovely film, but it's so cozy. The music, you know, just tucks me in, and I'm gone. Also, it's like 4.5 hours, so, you know, it's not my fault. But that's not an issue in the real world, is it? No. Overnight truck drivers struggling to stay awake to pay the bills, that's a bit more important, I'd say. And that's where Go pills were supposed to come into play. The pill that keeps you up for 40 hours straight. Yeah, doesn't that sound like a nightmare? What the hell? The US Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, again, DARPA, is currently funding this pill. The benefits it would have, I gotta say, if this thing works, I'm kinda on board, honestly. I can finally play 50 turns in a single round of Mario Party without having to sleep in between. It can finally be done. Or Monopoly. I can do one round of Monopoly, finally. Number 4, chimpanzee human. Also referred to as a human Z. Sounds awfully terrifying right off the bat. Look, here are the facts, people. We are very close to chimpanzees. Around 98% of our DNA is shared with that of a chimpanzee. That's why we look awfully familiar with our hands and beautiful eyes. Back in the 1920s, we got closer than ever. A human Z was not just a fantasy. Soviet biologist Ilya Ivanov inseminated female chimps with DNA, but it didn't work. Or did it? See, things got questionable when a chimp named Oliver hit the scene later in the 70s. He was walking like a human, referred to as the missing link because of his appearance. Yeah, he was previously a performance animal. He was a show chimp, so not a hybrid, but many viewed these experiments as immoral back in the day. Which is odd because I remember seeing chimps in family movies. I remember seeing like Most Extreme Primate, where he's doing like skateboard tricks, or he's like snowboarding all of a sudden. Air Bud as well. I don't know. What made these animals do all these sports? You know what I mean? Number 9, lions. Back in the 80s at the Chatbir Zoo in India, they started an experimental program where they would breed together a domestic lion, which is a bit smaller and has a less shaggy mane, with an African lion in the hopes that they could, you know, be introduced into the wild and help with the dwindling population of wild lions in India. Sounds like a great plan on paper. Sure, here we go. That's a step forward. But is it? No. The zoo found 2 African lions that were being used in a circus and then brought them in to breed with their 2 Asiatic lions. Now, when the cubs were born, it was clear that this was already a grave mistake, as the cubs already had severely weak back legs. They couldn't even walk. They were having extreme trouble walking, and as they got older, their immune systems started to fail. And by 2000, they had bred more than 70 of these hybrid lions, and they finally decided to stop the program, and all the males were given vasectomies in order to stop any further reproduction ever. Thing is, there are laws that prohibited them from killing animals, so they were simply just waiting around for them to die off naturally. Yeah, when there's a dwindling population of lions, it's insane to me that they wasted 20 years trying to do this when they could have just simply bred lions that they had. I don't know. Number 2. Pyrenean Ibex. The Pyrenean Ibex also went extinct, now this time much sooner than mammoths. Actually around 2000, period. Not 2,000 years ago, like 2000 the year. Yeah, the last one was a female named Celia, and a falling tree sadly killed her. Of all the ways to go, really? That's just brutal. A subspecies of the Spanish ibex, the Pyrenean ibex, were native to the Pyrenees Mountains on the border of Spain and France. Now, back in the medieval ages, their population was reduced drastically to an endangered level. You know, knights and swords equals lunch. We now have lunch. So the numbers dipped, okay? More than fair. We got armies to feed, yada yada. But in 2009, science was ready for the Pyrenean ibex to return. Okay, that's a little odd. It was successfully cloned and brought back from extinction for 7 minutes. DNA from the last living lady was implanted in the womb of a domestic goat. Lung complications are why the clone ultimately didn't survive, but we had a hybrid medieval animal back for 7 minutes. We're getting close. To what? Not really sure, but we're getting close to something. And finally, number 1. The kunga. Perhaps the earliest example of human-animal hybrid testing ever. Scientists recently learned about this donkey hybrid that once roamed ancient Mesopotamia. Now, this was a time before even horses were on this land, right? This was a long time ago. So they had to do something. Large kungas would pull wagons, and smaller ones would help pull plows. These little guys were the talk of the town. Imagine a hybrid animal before horses. No wonder they were a status symbol. Let's go. 4,000 years ago, they were given as gifts for weddings. Yummy. I wonder if this is a kunga. It smells like a kunga. After so long, scientists are finally able to figure out what exactly a kunga was a hybrid of. It was a female donkey and a male Syrian wild ass. Yeah, just a wild hybrid ass. It's pretty insane what you can still learn from ancient animal bones even from thousands of years ago. It's fascinating. More amazing how involved this hybrid was in Mesopotamian culture. I don't know, should we bring back the conga? Imagine seeing this thing in a farm, just pulling something. Number 10, the aviator suit. When it comes to new ideas or new inventions, it almost always starts messy, right? In some way, shape, or form. In today's list, it gets a little messy. A lot of horrible experiments done with groups of unaware subjects. To kick this grim one off, we'll look back to the early 1900s. We'll start with Franz Rachelt, a known inventor of the time. He invented his own version of a wearable aviator suit, basically a parachute, and it was made of 320 square feet of fabric, so not light at all. There's a lot of weight in his backpack. Now, in 1912, Franz wanted to test his new invention out publicly. Instead of using a dummy and throwing that dummy off the Eiffel Tower, he himself leaped. He strapped himself in and he leaped to his own death. Yeah, try not to say too many dark things here, but it was tragic. He publicly failed an experiment, and I think there's one photo of it online. It's like the only photo too of the 1900s, and it happens to be this guy. Number 9, monkey head transplant. Okay, this one's gonna make your head spin. The first ever successful monkey head transplant was back in the early 1970s. I imagine some of your parents may have heard about this. I bet it would be pretty hard to forget. I don't know, ask them about it. Ask them in the middle of dinner. Be like, hey, what about that monkey head transplant? They'll spit out their spaghetti. Be like, how do you know about that? American researcher Robert White pulled off the otherwise impossible in a slow, tedious, horrible operation. White took the head of one monkey and then attached it to a headless monkey. Now add a little time and energy and patience, voila, this actually worked out. Yeah, the monkey actually tried to bite one of the surgeons once it came back to life, which, I mean, totally fair. I'd be a little pissed off too. I'd try and bite someone if they put my head over there. Sadly, the monkey passed away 9 days later, but like the fact that this actually happened, 1, is terrifying. 2, dare I say it's a little miraculous. It's obviously scientifically insane. And 3, it's quite unfair to the animal in question. So let's never do this one again, shall we? Number 8, the Kola Super Deep Borehole. All right, let's put all our resources together and dig a deep hole. If you dug a hole through the center of the earth and then you jumped in, would you come out on the other side? Of course not. This isn't a cartoon. You would melt. You wouldn't get anywhere close. But it is the Arctic Circle in the 1970s, and Russia had a budget for such a thing. So a test was underway. Scientists began working on the project in 1970, and they got to about 40,000 feet come 1989. So for that many years, Russian dudes in winter coats were all just waiting, watching a hole be drilled. I love this. I love this image in my head. That's awesome. They got 1/3 through the Baltic continental crust. They got really deep and they found rocks older than 2 billion years old, which is great. But eventually they hit this muddy lava. What do you know? And they had to pack it up. A huge concern here was that demons would be released from the earth. That's fair. That's more than fair. That's a thought that I would probably have if I was deep down there. Okay, for sure. The previous title for deepest hole belonged to the United States Bertha Rogers hole, which reached 31,000 feet. Stanley Yelnats would be so proud, honestly. He'd be watching like, oh yes, you guys are killing it. Number 7, Hofling Hospital Experiment. This experiment happened all the way back in 1966 in a time where the rules of psychological experiments were a little more loose, you know, a little more, we don't care, try some out, right? It's horrible. Because of this, the nurses that were all part of this experiment actually had no idea that they were participants of the experiment, which nowadays would be illegal. That's correct. That's illegal. You can't do that. Basically, this experiment took place during the night shift. Now, this night nurse would receive a phone call during the shift, and on the other end would be one Dr. Smith, who's actually the researcher. He's in on the whole thing. He would ask the nurses quickly to check the medicine cabinet to see if they had astrotin, which was actually a drug that was made up for this experiment. It was actually just a placebo, not a real pharmaceutical. Now, the astrotin would clearly state the maximum dosage of 10 milligrams, but this Dr. Smith, in a hurry over the phone, would ask the nurses to administer 20 milligrams. That's a big no-no. You can't do that ever. They were told that the doctor was in a hurry and that he would sign the authorization papers as soon as he came in to see the patient later on that night. Now, if the nurse decided to give the patient the drug, they would be breaking 3 rules. 1, they're not allowed to accept instructions over the phone. 2, the dose was double the maximum limit stated on the box. And 3, the medicine itself was unauthorized. It was made up. It wasn't in the ward stock list, so it shouldn't be used in the hospital, period. Now, out of the 22, again, unknowing nurse patients, 21 of them went to administer this drug. Yeah, big oof on that one. Big yikes. But to be fair, that's the entire point of this test. So you look back and you're like, oh, that's not fair. We shouldn't have done that. We have to tell them. But you're also like, but it worked. 21 out of 22? I mean, this was 1966. We don't, obviously got a little bit messy, but this really showed the pressures that nurses were put under. Get a phone call from a random guy and go, oh, I hope so. Number 6, Talos.
Basically, I'm here to announce that we're building Iron Man.
Tactical Assault Light Operator Suit, aka Talos for short, was a project announced back in 2014. And like the former President Barack Obama said, this was supposed to be a modern-day Iron Man suit of armor. It was supposed to change warfare entirely, but 5 years later, the project was completely scrapped. Well, obviously, it's hard to do. I mean, we could barely launch Google Maps that same year, let alone a suit of armor, so okay, fair. It's tricky. Also, Steve Jobs is dead, so no one can figure this one out. Ideally, the suit would have given the user advanced tactical awareness and advanced military-grade armor, which has an exoskeleton underneath that's obviously wired to the helmet and then wired to the rest of the suit. It's cool. They figured a few things out while creating the suit, but overall, the Iron Man armor wasn't close to being like what we see on the big screen. Number 5, the Battle of Los Angeles. Ooh, this was a big whoops, big loud whoops for this one. The Battle of Los Angeles, otherwise known as the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, happened during World War II at the end of February 1942. This event, first of all, took place only a few months after the Pearl Harbor attack, so of course everybody was obviously immensely stressed out at the time. Something like 25 enemy aircraft was then spotted flying over Los Angeles in the late hours of February 24th. So air raids went off, blackouts were immediately put in effect. This was not a drill. Or was it? Everything was blasted towards this disturbance. In total, around 1,400 shells were shot off. 2 people had heart attacks. 5 people died in total from this retaliation, and it was all a false alarm. Nobody was attacking, nobody was there. To this day, we still can't explain it. A press conference was held by the Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, and he called the incident war nerves. He's like, ha, whoops, thought I heard a noise, oops, my bad, to all those individuals who had heart attacks. Number 4, backyard dog breeding. Okay, don't try crossbreeding at home. I don't think I have to tell you why you're eating your Mr. Noodles here watching this at 2 a.m. Don't breed animals. Great, hit that thumbs up. Awesome, good plan. Because things go south, right? Obviously. For example, back in 2010, a woman named Julie Leroy, she was working as an animal control officer. She got a call, an owner of a pit bull puppy said she didn't want to keep her. So when Julie arrived and saw the dog, she was then in complete disbelief. This dog was not just a pit bull dog. This dog was a hybrid and it wasn't healthy at all. But again, all the more reason why you should stick around for the thing. The dog had a squished body, it had a huge jaw, and a terrible underbite. Its body was so deformed from birth due to short spine syndrome. That's because they got said dog from a backyard breeder who was just carelessly breeding a bunch of dogs together, not really thinking about the consequences. Now thankfully, Julie did bring that dog home and gave her a loving home for the rest of her life. Her name's Kuda, and now she's in great hands. She's actually really, really cute. Dogs with short spine syndrome. Obviously it's wildly uncomfortable, but man, I love dogs, they're all cute. Number 3, Stanford Prison Experiment. Perhaps the most famous psychological experiment gone wrong. The Stanford Prison Experiment started on August 14, 1971 and was led by university psychology professor Philip Zimbardo. Now the experiment took volunteers and divided them into 2 groups. One group of prisoners and then the other group of guards. Then they placed all the volunteers into this fake prison that was created for the experiment, and the experiment aimed to see if and how quickly humans would just turn evil under the right conditions with the right amount of power. Pretty twisted, but yeah, I'd say we deserve to know what happens. It's a group version of the Milgram experiment, so it's an awful experiment on paper, but it's something you think about for 40 years afterwards. It was a test to try and answer the question of if humans are inherently good or inherently evil. And after just 6 days, the experiment needed to be wrapped up because the guards began tormenting the prisoners. Yeah, humans are awful, it seems. It really showed the kinds of things humans can be capable of even after such a short time with such a short, small change of power. You know what I mean? Like, this was less than a week, and these people are already turning into wild, horrible dictators in a fake prison. Number 2, the Great Stink of 1858. It's one thing living through a pandemic, but at least we're not living through something called the Great Stink. This was an event in central London and it lasted for a few months. In the summertime too, which is just great for great stinks. It was so hot and dry that the Thames River dried up, leaving just sewage left over. In order to continue to work, Parliament had to soak the curtains on the riverside in lime chloride just so that they wouldn't be sick doing their jobs. They almost moved their office to Oxford. That's how bad it smelled. Members of the committee were quitting their jobs. This is hilarious. I mean, it sounds horrible and stuff, but you have to laugh. Imagine formally quitting because it smells that bad. Hundreds of tons of lime were actually being discharged into sewers to hold the smell. So if you had a stuffy nose in July 1858, you could have made 1,500 pounds a week just by putting lemons and limes and stuff into sewers. Nobody wanted to do this job at all. So if you didn't mind the stinky stuff and you loved lime, buddy, I have the job for you. And finally, number 1, the battle of the stray dog. I grew up with dogs my whole life. It's stressful at times. You know, you open the door for a split second and all of a sudden your furry friend, the love of your life, is running down the street after a blue jay. It's just like, please don't do that. Please come back. Since the Second Balkan War in the early 1900s, Greece and Bulgaria were going head to head. A lot of conflict, a lot of emotions, tensions are high. Now come October 1925, things escalated to an unbelievable point. A Greek soldier was chasing after his dog, who just decided to bolt randomly, as these dogs do in life. But in doing so, he accidentally crossed the border into Bulgaria. The Greeks at this point were beyond upset, so they marched into Bulgaria, and so began a full-on war, right? Everyone's retaliating to everyone, but really it's just this dog in the middle who accidentally caused such a conflict. By the time the International Committee negotiated a ceasefire to clear up the obvious and horrible misunderstanding, 50 people had already lost their lives. Keep those leashes on, I guess, when you go for your afternoon walkie tonight. Number 10, feel the music. There are many odd experiments in history where humans, should have left human elements out of it, like music and illicit substances. I can't say what I want to say, but it's a bad substance that's white. There you go, paint the image in your head. There you go, we'll move around YouTube's algorithm. Back in 2011, a study was done where rats, or rather a bunch of rats, were all put in a room and on loop, they played a Miles Davis song just over and over again. So they were all on said substances and they were in a room while Miles Davis played. This is a science experiment, may I add. Just smooth jazz for these rats all day long. Imagine walking into that room, you're like, what's going on in here? It's kind of fun, dare I say. Well, before the substances were injected into these test subjects, they all seemed to have calm demeanors while Beethoven was playing. But after injected, all the rats were neurologically triggered to that smooth jazz. They acted differently in a group setting, which is kind of weird. After a full week on the, not so great sauce, the rats were all of a sudden like, you know what? We love Miles Davis now. We changed our minds. So yeah, illicit substances changes how you listen to music apparently. If you're a rat, any rats watching, hit that thumbs up with your little rat hands. Number 9, the first pregnancy test. If you're looking past the ancient Egyptians and their use of barley and urine to determine if somebody's pregnant, you'll often land on this experiment from the 1930s. It's pretty close. It's heavily inspired. It was developed in 1931 by Maurice Friedman at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. Now what would happen here is doctors would inject a rabbit with urine from a woman who was suspected of being pregnant, and the rabbit's ovaries could easily tell if that was the case. Accurate? Yes. Historical? Changes the game? Why, of course. Would it also end up with the rabbit passing away every single time? Yes. It's sad more often than not when humans are involved in any medical process, but we're trying to not do that anymore. We're doing pretty good. All those furs were like, nah, get out of here. Number 8, human cow eggs. Okay, we had a few giggles with that one. Time to get into some real dark science stuff. Back in 2008, hybrid research was being done. Human-animal hybrid research obviously was being done because, of course. The whole idea was to find a cure for Parkinson's disease. Now, I like these projects because we're moving forward at least, or we're trying to. We're trying to find a solution in some way, shape, or form, right? Road's gonna get a little dirty, but we'll figure it out. Otherwise, we don't need to be poking around cows, you know what I mean? Nobody needs 3 bowls of cereal before gym class anymore. Those days are over. There's other ways to wake up. I would do the beep test, I almost throw up every single day. Yeah, I would just have a full bowl of cereal, then just go to class and play baseball all morning. It's like, geez. Scientists used the nucleus of a cow egg. They took it out and replaced that nucleus with that of human and skin cells. Add in a little time and the egg can now develop and turn into a blastocyst, aka a clone embryo. And there we have stem cells for says science. Again, this is a lovely step, but how far do we go? How much DNA are we gonna mix before, things can go south? For example, like Number 7. Kunga. Perhaps the earliest example of human-animal hybrid testing. Here we go. Scientists recently learned about this donkey hybrid that once roamed ancient Mesopotamia. This was a long time ago. This was before horses had even arrived to land, so they had to do something, right? They needed help pulling stuff. So large kungas would step in and they would pull wagons, and smaller kungas would help pulling plows. These little guys were the talk of the town. Imagine a hybrid animal before horses. No wonder they were a status symbol. Come on. 4,000 years ago, they were given as gifts for weddings. Yummy. Can you imagine that? I think it's a kunga. It smells like a kunga. I think it's definitely a kunga. After so long, scientists are finally able to figure out what exactly a kunga was a hybrid of. This whole time, it was a female donkey and a male Syrian wild ass. Put them together, what a wild time. It's wild what you still learn about ancient animal bones from thousands and thousands of years ago. More amazing how involved this hybrid was in Mesopotamian culture. I don't know, should we bring back the kunga? Kind of neat. Kunga Uber? I would take those, hop in a little cart. Number 6, monkey head transplant. Okay, here we go. The first ever successful monkey head transplant. Crazy that I'm saying that out loud. This was back in the early 1970s. I imagine some of your parents may have heard of this. I don't know, I bet it would be hard to forget. Ask them. Ask them in the middle of dinner when they're mid-bite. Ask them about the monkey head transplant from the 70s. Just ruined dinner. American researcher Robert White, he pulled off the, otherwise impossible and a slow, tedious operation. See, White took the head of one monkey and then attached it to a already headless monkey. Add a little time and energy and some science and voila, this actually worked. Yeah, the monkey actually tried to bite one of the surgeons once it came to life, which, totally fair. I'd probably be a little upset too. Sadly, the monkey passed away 9 days later, but like I said, the fact this actually happened, one, it's terrifying, and two, dare I say, it's miraculous. Some sci-fi stuff right here. We're moving heads, we're transferring heads for 9 business days. Gross. Number 5. Monkey become human. This next one's a little less hands-on, so, if you have food, now you can probably take a bite. It's probably safe for now. Back in 1931, psychologist Winthrop Kellogg, familiar name, he was curious. He sat up one night out of the blue and thought, you know what would happen if a monkey was raised with human beings? Would it end up like that, monkey from MVP? Would it learn to play hockey for the local team? Or would operations go south quickly? The latter happened. Yeah, no hockeys are doing any crosses and deeks. It's all bad. When it comes to animals and science, it's pretty bad. It's nothing like the cinema. None of that shit happened at all. Kellogg instead brought a baby female chimp named Gua into his home. Yeah, this man raised the chimp as if it were another human being alongside his own human being son, Donald, which is just a wild time growing up. I'd rather you have an imaginary friend than a monkey as a friend. That's pretty dangerous. But they did everything together. They played, they went to bed, they did all their human stuff. The test was working, but it ended abruptly after Kellogg's son, Donald, started to make chimp noises. Yeah, and then everybody was like, you know what? Let's not do that. That was terrifying. Maybe chimps can't learn how to kickflip. Maybe instead humans just go backwards in evolution. So Gua was then released and no more human best friend. Back to, dare I say, normal. I always wanted a monkey best friend growing up. Now I don't. Now I really don't. Number 4, multi-dog. The multi-dog. Yeah, this is gross. This was back in the 50s when a Soviet scientist, Vladimir Demikov, created, a multi-headed dog. It's pretty easy. Time magazine covered it. Of course, this is again a feat in science, as disgusting as it is. The adult dog had a newborn grafted to its neck, so when it grew, it could somehow survive off the blood of the main, bigger dog. The body, for a lack of a better term. Gross. When observed, the puppy did have its own characteristics. It was playful as it growls, just as the other dog's characteristics would be. Now, it is a sad 1950s Soviet animal experiment, so of course that animal didn't survive a very long time. But crossbreeding experiments from hell, this is why we're here, you know what I mean? It's like that 3-headed dog from Harry Potter, you know what I mean? Cerberus, I think his name is Cerberus. This, a little more terrifying, a little more jarring, I'd say, to look at. After you play Harry Potter chess, this thing pops out, you're like, ooh. Never mind, 0 points for Gryffindor. Number 3, lions. Back in the 1980s at the Chatbir Zoo in India, they started this experimental program where they would breed together a domestic lion, which is a bit smaller and has a less shaggy mane. They would breed that with an African lion in hopes that they would meet in the middle and be introduced to the wild and somehow help with the dwindling population of wild lions in India. Now on paper, this sounds like a great idea, dare I say, a step forward for the animals in the wild, but it wasn't. Nope, that's why we're here on this list. The zoo found 2 African lions that were being used in a circus, and then they brought them in to breed with their 2 Asiatic lions. Now, when the cubs were born, it was clear this was already a mistake, as the cubs had severely weak back legs right off the hop. It wasn't looking good. They were having extreme trouble walking, and as they got older, their immune system started to fail. Now by 2000, they had bred more than 70 of these new hybrid lions, and it was too late, right? They'd finally decided to stop the program, and all the males were then given vasectomies in order to stop any further reproduction. But there were laws that prohibited them from killing any animals, so they were simply just waiting for them to die of natural causes, which, I mean, in this case doesn't really exist. Where there's a dwindling population of lions, it's insane to me that they wasted 20 years doing this when they could have just, simply bred the lions that they had with other lions. Probably harder than it sounds, but I mean, I don't know. What the f is this? New lions with like Bambi legs? That's way worse. Number 2, spider art. Nice. This is like Art Attack, but terrifying because I hate spiders. Before our number 1 spot, I have to mention NASA's 1995 spider test. They're a little cool, dare I say. When nature meets science, we often get jarring results, be it hybrid animals, clones, monkeys going on and off, you name it. Spiders, as fascinating as they already are, can be even more mysterious, especially when they're exposed to, how do I say this, mind-altering illicit substances. You got it? NASA wanted to determine the toxicity between all of these substances and what differences they may look like in real life. Now, spiders are fascinating. We can see how they think and survive every day. We see it up close. We walk through them and we go right in your face. But we never see them like this before. Caffeinated behavior is all over the place when it comes to their web. It doesn't look like a normal web at all. But with hallucinogens, it's the same shape of a web, but it's almost missing steps. I don't think any animal should also have coffee, let alone hallucinogens. My God, no way. Also, I can't even have coffee. I'm crazy when I have coffee, let alone any of this shit. And finally, number 1, the mouse with an ear on its back. Yeah, the title says it all. I can say that and we could be done here, but I think I have to explain a bit more. If we ever reboot Stuart Little, this guy has to audition. Let's do it. A live action? Are you kidding me? He'd f it up. Back in 1997, this Bacanti mouse became the test subject to determine if scientists could grow cartilage using chondrocytes, aka cells from a cow. Well, it worked, and we're still talking about it. I'm still talking about it, obviously. I mean, look at this. Now, it all started when Joseph Bacanti, pediatric surgeon, he began designing human organs. Now, this was during a shortage. He wasn't just born and, started to make ears like a serial killer. No, he was changing the medical game. And little did he know, he was about to change the science game as well. He constructed a regular looking ear, and he told his brother Chuck and his partner Bob to not bring up the fact that he attached said ear to a live mouse. Now, that's a pretty hard secret to keep, I imagine, so Chuck ended up spilling the beans. Now everybody knows, but at the same time, now we all know that cow cartilage can create cells, which is pretty good. That's pretty good science. Can grow ears. I want to Q-tip his ear back thing, you know what I mean? Starting our list off at number 10, microwave. I can't say microwave anymore. I have to say microwave because of this video.
Milk, full fat, which I've warmed in the microwave.
Thanks to this first invention on our list today, I can eat Hot Pockets anytime I want. Not all inventions allow you to accomplish such a feat. Percy Spencer changed the science and snack game. He was originally an American engineer working for Raytheon, but Percy also loved a snack on the site. So he had a chocolate bar in his pocket one day. He was saving it for later, but when he walked in front of a magnetron, the chocolate bar in his pocket, well, it sadly melted. But luckily for us, after a few follow-up experiments in 1945, we now get microwave ovens. And it's always a good time. It wasn't until 1967, mind you, where microwaves were in our actual homes, because of course it took a little while to narrow down. But yeah, nowadays it's great. We almost forget we have one now. It's perfect. Number 9. Super glue. I feel like we're using super glue now more than ever in history. Activists are gluing themselves to tables, streets, you name it. But who do we have to thank for such a sticky substance? Back in 1942, inventor Dr. Harry Coover was working on plastic sights for weapons. Now, this was intended to help Allied forces during World War II, but while working on these clear plastic sights, he made super glue instead. Now, obviously, he was a little busy at the time, so he shelved this invention for 9 years before returning back to the lab. Superglue didn't completely come out until 1958. It took 16 years to get to our shelves. And it's still there. We use superglue to fix everything, even the occasional social issue, it appears. Number 8. Theory of evolution. Charles Darwin. We don't think of this man too often for obvious reasons, but he had some ideas that were out there, right? In his book, The Origin of Species, written back in 1859, he explained how humans were evolved from the animal kingdom. And as if that wasn't already a handful of news, he also claimed that the world was much, much older than what everybody thought. And around the 1930s, that crazy idea was then accepted into the scientific community officially. Imagine being the first person to be like, I think we came from animals. I don't think we're aliens. I think we're actually animals. That's a hot take, right? Number 7, pacemaker. Here we go. This one's a tad more exciting than super glue, dare I say. A pacemaker. Odds are you know somebody with one of these right now. It all started in 1956 when Wilson Greatbach was trying to record the rhythm of the heart. Not the song, the actual rhythm of the actual heart. That's the dumbest joke I've ever put in anything in my entire life. But after installing the wrong piece by mistake, he actually realized that the circuit was emitting these pulses, these heartbeat type pulses. So he thought, well, maybe I can create a device small enough for a body and actually stimulate an actual heartbeat. Cut to 1958, a dog was the first ever proud owner of one pacemaker. He's walking around, he's like, hey, life's rough. Number 6, oxygen. Okay, speaking of hot takes, again, imagine being the first person to be like, what is this? What am I breathing right now? Why is this so good? What is oxygen? What is all this gas around us? Pretty hot take. That's a pretty bold thing to just dive into. Oxygen was identified for the first time scientifically by Joseph Priestley back in 1774. After he heated up red mercuric oxide, he found this colorless gas, and at first he called it dephlogisticated air, which is, doesn't roll off the tongue per se. And Priestley shared his discovery with the French scientist Antoine Lavoisier. Lavoisier then connected these dots, and we learned that oxygen supports animal life. And us too. We don't mind air. Air's that's pretty nice. Number 5, not flat. Let's talk about the Earth for a hot second, shall we? Any guesses as to what shape it is? I'll tell you one thing, it's certainly not flat. Definitely not a flat planet. We can hit that thumbs up for not a flat Earth. We've known this since 1619, when Johann Kepler published the third law of planetary motion. Now this was a glorious day for the scientific community. This is when humans finally figured out that the Earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around. And also circular. That's also a great point to learn at the same time, that it's not flat. For sure not flat, definitely a circle. If you're a flat earther, hit that thumbs up. We're learning today, Number 4, Velcro. Alright, shout out to every guy out there with a Velcro wallet. Keep doing it, man. I still have mine from high school. I'll never abandon that thing ever in my life. It's still got some stick left in them. Who must we thank for Velcro? I use Velcro every day. I use them on my rock climbing shoes so I don't fall off the wall. And it's all thanks to a Swiss engineer named Georges de Mestral. And back in 1941, he found these burrs clinging to his pants and his dog's fur. He went for a walk and then he was covered in all those spiky balls. That's the worst, eh? That happens so often. We've all been there, but we've certainly never been inspired like George was. The word Velcro is actually a combination of velvet and crochet. Now these artificial hooks that stick on your clothes, they were heavily used by NASA first in the 1960s, and then for us, of course, when we weren't ready to tie our shoes. Number 3, the discovery of penicillin. Sometimes miracles happen when nobody's even in the room, right? It's like boiling water or something like that, you have to look away. A watched pot never boils. It certainly does though, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin back in 1928. Now at the time, he was actually studying Staphylococcus, bacteria that causes infections and boils and nasty stuff. But right before Alexander left for a 2-week vacation, he left a petri dish with some of that Staphylococcus just on the lab table, rather than stored away in an incubator. Turns out everybody here needed alone time because during this off time, a Penicillium mold spore just got the confidence to introduce itself to said bacteria. And now the room's temperature was also perfect. It was a lovely moment for everybody involved. Plus the emptiness of the room allowed for the mold to finally fight back in peace and prevent that bacteria from growing furthermore. He discovered this antibacterial substance was only produced by strains of Penicillium. Guy's like, all right, see you in 2 weeks. Comes back to a literal miracle. It's like, what? Number 2, the Trinity Test. Not all of these are Velcro and fun and games, okay? Some science discoveries suck. When Americans heard that Germans were developing nuclear weapons, they joined in with their development on a project, most of it being done in New Mexico. So in 1939, President Roosevelt got scientists, military officials, this whole team of brilliant individuals to figure out how to use uranium as a weapon. The government eventually started to fund said research, which was happening at Columbia University, and in 1942, engineers from the Army joined in as well. And following Pearl Harbor, that's when President Roosevelt transitioned the project into a military branch officially. the Manhattan Project, made with the strict goal of weaponizing nuclear energy. There were facilities in New Mexico, Tennessee, Washington, even here in Canada, you name it. But come July 16, 1945, the Trinity Test was conducted. The first atomic weapon was detonated in a New Mexico desert, and it was deemed a success, with mushroom clouds reaching as high as 40,000 feet. It was, that was definitely life-changing, for sure. And finally, number 1, Coca-Cola. All right, we'll finish on a nice sweet note. Let's do it. Every time it's the holiday season, I see nothing but Coca-Cola ads. I don't know how they do it. They've somehow tapped into the entire holiday season. But how does such a syrup come to be in the first place? We'll end on this one so we can all grab a drink immediately after the video ends. I got you, I know how to do this. Inventor and pharmacist John Pemberton originally set out to cure headaches, which is pretty ironic. 2 main ingredients, of course, being coca leaves and cola nuts. Now, things were boring, dare I say, until his lab assistant accidentally mixed the 2 with carbonated water. And then, poof, it's a miracle. It's like they knew, it's like they were from the future and they're like, hey, trust me, I got us. Over time, you throw in this top secret recipe, which we still don't know, and now we have a movie theater essential, and one of my favorite soft drinks, Coca-Cola. Personally, actually, I'm lying. I'm a Dr. Pepper guy, if anything. 23 flavors? How in the world do they get it in that little can? If we get a part 2, I'll throw Dr. Pepper in. There you go. Kicking off the list at number 10, got a passport. Ramses II is known as one of the greatest ancient Egyptian rulers of all time. He was called Ramses the Great, so that's a good sign already. At a young age, he fought in harsh battles to protect the borders of Egypt, and during his reign, the Egyptian army reached 100,000 men. That's a pretty large army. He was later referred to as the Great Ancestor, and it didn't take long for Ramses II to declare himself a god. It's always fun being like, hey, by the way, I'm a god now. That's how cool I am. 30 years into his ruling, Ramses was ritually turned into an Egyptian god. It was a formal thing. Though it wasn't until 3,000 years later until Ramses would truly soar through the skies. He was buried in his treasure after 96 years of living, and in 1974, he finally started to show signs of aging. Not too bad. He went from being on display to being sent to Paris to get a glow up, to preserve the king's body even longer. Instead of being listed as luggage on the way to Paris, the pharaoh was given an official Egyptian passport for the commute. The government gave a mummy a passport. This is like the first 5 minutes of a horror film. Under occupation, it even said king. And there was even a small disclaimer noting that he was in fact still dead. You can never be too sure, Number 9. Baboon tattoos. Ancient Egyptians worshipped animals. This is common knowledge now at this point. We've heard about their love towards cats, which I'll explain later on, but what about baboons? Yeah, they were pretty important pieces to this ancient puzzle as well. Some mummies were found with tattoos of baboons on their bodies. Now, one of the most strange things that pharaohs did back in ancient Egyptian days was train baboons to make arrests. Imagine stealing a pair for your family and then 4 baboons start doing parkour chasing you down. That's so alarming. I would just throw it and be like, please stop. You're so scary and strong. They trained baboons to pick fruit, they trained them to make beer, and they also trained them to entertain. Yeah, these baboons were the life of the party. Their dance moves alone would be reason enough to tattoo one on my arm. So you know what? I get it. Get a Harambe tattoo. I'm like, I see it. I see the similarities. Number 8, worship dung beetles. So worshipping a baboon that dances and makes holiday ales, yeah, I can see how one would worship such a creature. That makes sense. But pharaohs also worship dung beetles, and their reasoning may surprise you. Dung beetles, also known as scarabs, are the only species in the entire world that follows the Milky Way naturally. Animals are born with natural instincts. Sea turtles race to the sea. These guys follow the cosmos. It's pretty wild. It's one thing to follow the sun naturally because it gives off warmth. Sunflowers will literally turn their head to find the sun, which is super creepy, but it's beautiful. These insects would follow the line of the Milky Way and then roll their poop towards it. They'd be like, hello Milky Way, and they just... Hieroglyphs of these beetles are seen all over. Like near the sacred lake at the Temple of Karnak, for example, there's a massive scarab monument. And today, if you walk around it 9 times, you get good luck. And don't worry, you don't have to roll any droppings at the same time. Don't get dizzy, that's all, it's the only rule. The scarab is there to represent the god Khepri, which ancient Egyptians believed was the sun. I grew up thinking the sun was a baby, but that's because I watched Teletubbies, so, depends. Number 7, surprise each other. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar were a pretty beneficial couple, to say the least. Cleopatra would use Caesar's armies, which in turn would allow her to rule Egypt, while Caesar was eyeing down Cleopatra's extreme wealth. They were the perfect pair. She was able to financially support Caesar enough for him to return to power back in Rome, but how did such a perfect pair meet in the first place? Did Cleopatra swipe right? No. Well, a then 52-year-old Julius Caesar visited the much younger Cleopatra, so she then sent a surprise gift to his chambers. She got her crew to roll her up in a carpet or bed sheets, it's not really confirmed, something along those lines, and then delivered her to his door completely nude. He unraveled a naked Cleopatra and he's like, okay, hello. That's pretty impressive. Cleopatra was down for fun surprises. While we don't recommend this as an approach ever, it's one worth mentioning on our list. Number 6, gender reveal parties. We've all seen those videos. A guy goes to hit a baseball, he misses it, the baseball breaks and there's pink dust all around his feet and he starts crying. It's wonderful. Gender reveal parties were quite popular, until they started lighting wildfires. But back in the day, Egyptians had a pretty interesting method for predicting the gender of a newborn. Instead of peeing on a pregnancy test, you would have to use wheat and barley seeds instead. Depending on how those barley crops grew, they could accurately predict the sex of the child. They were right 85% of the time, which is quite impressive back in the day. We went from watering crops to burning them. Hashtag, it's a boy. Number 5, space knife. Only a few years after King Tut's tomb was discovered in the Valley of the Kings, archaeologist Howard Carter found 2 daggers that were buried with the king. Now, like I mentioned earlier, it's not uncommon to be buried with your treasure or belongings. It's why ancient Egyptians would build these tombs in a certain way, so grave robbers can't just sneak in after you pass away and then take all of your goodies. So 2 daggers were found with King Tut, one made of iron and the other with gold. Now, with iron being more rare than gold during the Bronze Age, this was quite a big deal. With recent advancements in technology, we're able to use a technique called portable X-ray fluorescent spectrometry, and according to the journal Meteorites and Planetary Science, the blade is actually made of iron, nickel, and cobalt, suggesting that its material is that of extraterrestrial origin. A blade fell from the sky and now a king has it. That's pretty insane. Also, aliens? Just saying. Number 4, KV-55. Also located in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, Tomb 55, otherwise known as KV-55, was found by Edward Arton back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb, and the reason that we call this tomb by a number rather than a name is because we really don't know for sure who's inside. Even the walls of the tombs inside, they aren't covered with beautiful hieroglyphs to tip us off on their history or their ruling, it's just bare. The only hint as to who is buried remains on the walls. It's one hieroglyph that remains, and it was discovered also in 1907, and it translates simply to, "The evil one shall not live again." That's very scary. That's definitely scarier than Greg was here. I don't know. Even massive stones were built and set up in order to prevent anything from getting out, whereas usually with ancient tombs it's the opposite, so that's pretty scary. The description for those inside the tomb has also been destroyed, so we have really no idea who's in KV-55 or what. Number 3, ancient Photoshop. When we look back at ancient artwork, we see these kings and queens and they look athletic. They look to be in great shape, when in reality, these pharaohs were probably quite obese. I mean, think about it. If you slam wine and bread all day and you have baboons dancing around, plus a little dab of honey every, 8 minutes, yeah, you're gonna gain some weight. Many of these ancient pharaohs had diabetes, and Queen Hatshepsut, who was alive during the 15th century BC, her sarcophagus shows her as slim and strong, but historians all agree that she was out of shape and extremely unhealthy. Honestly, I would do the exact same if I was there back then. She was ahead of her time. If somebody made a statue for me, I'd be like, yeah, give it an 8-pack, make him extremely jacked and 7'2". Can we do that? Sure, no one's gonna ask questions. I'm Dwayne "The Rock" Johnston, just write it down, please. Number 2, worshipped cats. I am allergic to cats, but I still love them. I still pet them. I ruin my entire night just to get my face right there next to their cute little furry face. But ancient Egyptians, like I said earlier, really loved cats. They respected them, they worshipped them. Even though at the time dogs were respected for being hunters, cats were still considered magical creatures. So if there's ever a cat versus dog argument going on your end of the screen, cats win. I'm allergic and I'm still saying cats win. That's huge. If you had a cat, it means you had good luck. When cats passed away, they too were mummified back in the day. You would think that alone was plenty of respect, but ancient Egyptians and pharaohs went a step further. After their cat died, they would shave their eyebrows off and then mourn until they grew back. That's like 3.5 months of cat depression. That's wild. Next time your friend tells you that their cat passed away, tell them that if they really love them, they'll shave their eyebrows off and then see what they say. Also, you don't have to make your friends shave their eyebrows. Let's leave this one in the past. That's fun. Just be sad with eyebrows. Be like, Number 1, fight a hippo. Egypt's first pharaoh, Menes, although we know next to nothing about his history, there is something there that has historians scratching their heads to this day. At his early time, the pharaoh was setting out to unite all of Egypt under his rule. The time that he ruled as well is considered a rather peaceful time when comparing it to years later. We know that he was well respected, and we also know that after his 63 years of peaceful ruling, he was stomped to death by a hippo. That's horrible. It's a horrible way to go out. He was an elderly ruler at that time. He was surrounded by guards, and somehow a hippo got all the way to his chambers. A hippo, and then ended the pharaoh's life. Some suggest that the reason there's nothing written about this pharaoh's tragic, horrible demise is because it's possible that the hippo was his pet. This is why you don't try and tame a beast as a pet. Perhaps this was an early similar situation as the Siegfried and Roy tiger attack. Just stick to smaller magical cats. They're much safer. They won't stomp you to death. Oh my god, it's horrible.
Number 10. John Mack. In the early 90s, a Pulitzer Prize winning psychologist named Dr. John E. Mack made the jump from diagnosing ordinary psychological conditions to researching apparent alien abductees and their stories and experiences surrounding UFOs. Yep, Google it up. It's actually terrifying and very real. Apparently, cases studied by Mack and abductions sometimes get involved with hypnosis. This guy was a tenured professor since the 50s at Harvard. He did his research. The UFO abduction rabbit hole led him to interviewing and studying more than 200 people who insist that they were taken. At first, he was trying to crack the psychosis of the subject, but after studying and funding from the Rockefellers, private donors, and universities, he wrote numerous books on the phenomena and its strangeness. Again, tenured and Pulitzer Prize winner. He sadly passed in 2004 from a drunk driver. His life and death holds heavy conspiracy debate around it. Check it out. It's a little bit strange. Number 9. Sophia. We've seen her on Fallon, we've seen her on breakfast television. She still looks like a bad cyberpunk character, doesn't she? Sophia by Hanson Robotics, the most advanced human-like robot that we have. Well, actually, this is like their 12th one. This is the world's first robot citizen. Literally. Not only is she considered a citizen, she has a credit card and a seat in the UN. Like what? In 2016, Sophia premiered on the Jimmy Fallon Show playing rock, paper, scissors. Yeah, simple stuff. 2 years later, she's harmonizing with Jimmy live. Also, they didn't sing Mr. Roboto. Like, I just feel like that was a huge missed opportunity there. Like, where are the writers, dude? I've seen the Terminator and Ex Machina, and at the Web Summit presentation in 2018, Sophia and her brother Han glitched out on stage and had a terrifying, cryptic, non-coherent conversation, joking about ending the world. Yeah, it's horrifying. You gotta check it out. Dude, I feel like Furbies were their first try, and now they got these like Brat Dolls mini Sophias coming out soon. Like, where's this going? Number 8. Proctor's Ledge. Over 1,000 documents from Salem's witch trials, yet none of the accounts actually specify where the hangings took place. For more than 300 years, it was believed that the 19 people who were accused, tried, and executed in the Salem witch trials of 1692 were hanged at the summit of Gallows Hill. Maps of 1700 Salem show Gallows Hill marked out, but no actual marker of the execution site. That's odd. A team of researchers began to reconsider the evidence in 2010 and eventually concluded it was the right spot. Yeah, oopsies. Actually, the real execution spot was called Proctor's Ledge. Also, eerie name for where they hang people, isn't it? It was confirmed in 2016 by scientists after ground-penetrating data and writings from 1692 that it wasn't the actual location of the brutality. I know what you're thinking. It's named after John Proctor. No, it's not. However, really odd timing, as he was one of the witches accused of witchcraft. Locals say that the ghost named the Lady in White visits Proctor's Ledge often, which now makes sense with the whole "we found the right spot" stuff. Visitors claim to have caught sightings of her and even catch her disembodied voice. Yeah. 7. Arthur Flowerdew. James Arthur Flowerdew was born in England in 1906. Grew up, paid his taxes, lived a pretty normal life. At about the age of 12, he began to have strange recurring dreams and hallucinations, though, over time crystallizing into a very clear and vivid image. Dreams riddled with stone cities, carvings in cliffs, and vast deserts. He didn't understand what it all meant. One day, as an old man, he was watching a documentary on the BBC on the ancient city of Petra in Jordan. He was stunned. This was the city he had always seen. He called the BBC and asked them to interview him. Archaeological experts and the Jordanian government even invited him to come out to Jordan, where he continued to even baffle experts. Flowerdew was able to find his way around the city without a map, giving precise details on landmarks and even pointing out undiscovered locations. Yeah, here's the scary part. After all of this, he was convinced that he had lived an entire previous life in ancient times and was reincarnated in the 20th century. Number 6. Props. Elmer McCurdy was an American outlaw, running with a small crew, banking and train robbing the Wild West until he was killed in a shootout with sheriffs after robbing a Katy train in Oklahoma in 1911. Famously known as the bandit who wouldn't give up, his mummified body was first put on display at an Oklahoma funeral home before being an amusement, traveling carnival show to carnival show during the 1920s right through the 1960s. After changing ownership several times, McCurdy's remains eventually wound up at the Pike Amusement Zone in Long Beach, California. His corpse was then used as a prop, but then discovered by a film crew on a set of The $6 Million Man. They were positively identified in 1976, and the following year in 1977, Elmer McCurdy's body was finally laid to rest at the Summit View Cemetery in Oklahoma. McCurdy's fingers were apparently so damaged that detectives couldn't even pull a fingerprint. The coroners had to x-ray his teeth and measure his bones to ID him. His pockets included a bullet, a Sunny Amusement Museum of Crime ticket, a newspaper article, and a 1924 penny. Yeah, that's terrible. Just weekend at Bernieing him for like 60 years set to set, not really knowing it's a real body? People will do anything for money, won't they? Number 5. Operation High Jump. Operation High Jump, officially named the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program, launched in 1946 to 1947, an operation to establish an Antarctic research base organized by Admiral Richard E. Byrd. High Jump included 4,700 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircrafts. The war's end signaled the onset of the atomic age and a desire to secure supplies of uranium. With its almost unlimited mineral deposits, the largely unexplored territory of Antarctica was just the prize. It commenced 1946 and ended in late 1947. Or did it? Also known as Task Force 68, Byrd and his team established the Little America 4 base near 3 previous bases in the ice. The frozen aircrafts would photograph as much of the Antarctic's land surface as possible during this 3-month operation. Seems like the public thinks that High Jump could have been more fishy than we think. Seems like skeptics are leaning towards more of a secret military expedition to the center of the Earth type stuff. Yep. Apparently there's a mouth to the center of the planet in the Antarctic, and there was a secret race to find it. High Jump is still today at the mercy of the internet on whether or not it was a legit project or a secretly funded scientific expedition. Google it up. It's pretty wild and very real. Number 4. Ouija boards. Popularized by teens in the 1970s, the Ouija board has earned its reputation over the years. Created almost 100 years before its heightened popularity, the year is 1891, and as the first ads started to appear in papers claiming, quote, Ouija, the wonderful talking board, the title from a Pittsburgh toy and novelty shop. The first paper described it as a magical game that answered questions about the past, present, and future with marvelous accuracy. A flat board with the letters of the alphabet configured in 2 semicircles. Above, the numbers 0 through 9, the words yes and no in the upper corners, goodbye at the bottom. No batteries included nor needed. Now, the origins are pretty messy, and it's hard to kind of pinpoint who or what inspired these early attempts at this game. It kind of just appeared on shelves. No, literally. The Kennard Novelty Company exclusively made and marketed these talking boards, and apparently the lore goes that one of the designer's sisters was a medium and asked the board what it would like to be called. It responded, Ouija, followed by good luck. Well, that's absolutely terrifying. At least good sportsmanship though, right? Yeah, I've never played with one of these, nor will I ever. That's a no-brainer for me, 100%. Number 3, the Philadelphia Experiment. I pray that this one is a hoax because there's a lot of documents that relate to this subject around the time that don't really seem to add up. The Philadelphia Experiment was an alleged event witnessed by Carl Allen and the United States Navy shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in October 1943. Allen describes an experiment where the US Navy attempted to render itself invisible, cloaking the destroyer the USS Eldridge, and the bizarre scientific results that followed. On Allen's account, the destroyer successfully made itself invisible, but the ship inexplicably teleported to Norfolk, Virginia for several minutes and then reappeared back in Philly. Sounds pretty cool, right? So what's the catch? The ship's crew was supposed to have suffered various side effects, including insanity, intangibility, and being frozen in place. Like people stuck in the walls and stuff. Stuck in the floors like this is a scene from Jumanji. Terrifying. The story surfaced in the late 1950s when Allen sent a book full of handwritten letters referring to the experiment to a US Navy research organization. The US Navy maintains that there has been no such experiment ever conducted and that the details are highly exaggerated and falsified. Dude, I hope so, because this is horrifying. Number 2. Wow. In a 1959 paper, Cornell University physicists speculated that if an extraterrestrial civilization was attempting to communicate with us using radio signals, that they might use a frequency of 1420 megahertz, which is naturally emitted by hydrogen, the most common element in the universe. In 1973, Ohio State University assigned the Big Ear to the scientific search for extraterrestrial intelligence. 1977, Jerry Amon, a SETI volunteer astronomer, was analyzing data and spots a series of signal intensities and frequencies that left him and his colleagues astonished. The WOW signal was the first signal detected from Earth. The signal came from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. Amon discovered the anomaly. Impressed by the result, on the computer printout he circled 6EQUJ5 and wrote 3 letters beside it. Wow. Leading to the event's famous name. The signal lasted for a full 72 seconds, and it remains today as the strongest candidate for an ET radio transmission ever detected. And number 1, of course, the USS Cyclops. Launched in May of 1910, the USS Cyclops was a Protus-class collier built for the United States Navy, a huge cargo ship designed for transporting coal. In 1918, the cursed vessel left Rio de Janeiro, heading for Barbados, right around a certain dangerous triangle. Unfortunately, the Voyager was never to be seen again. Named Cyclops after a race of giants from Greek mythology, she was huge and heavy, unmissable by the naked eye. So what happened to her? The loss of the ship and crew still remains the single largest loss of life at sea the United States Navy has ever experienced. Funny thing is, it went right through the Bermuda Triangle, a place where magnetic compasses stop working, ships are never heard from again, and of course the military still refuses to operate and research. Skeptics are quick to say aliens and black holes, but the magnetism surrounding the Bermuda Triangle cases might be a logical explanation. I think they still owe us some explanations, no? I'm looking at you, Freedom of Information Act.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Bobby, Eddie, and David. When Bobby Chiffran was 19 years old, he found out he had a twin, a brother named Eddie. The two were raised separately because they had been adopted at birth into different households. Not too long after finding out about each other, things took an even crazier twist when Bobby and Eddie found out that they had a triplet, another brother named David. What should have been a very joyous reunion for the triplets turned very dark when they began to uncover the truth about what happened and why they had spent all of those years not knowing the others existed. As it turns out, they found out they were forced to be subjects of an experiment they had no idea was taking place. Peter Neubauer was a child psychiatrist who wanted to study nature versus nurture, but decided to do it in this cruel and unethical way. He believed that twins or triplets had a better chance of thriving if they were separated from their twin, and he wanted to prove this by unknowingly separating twins from each other at birth. Luckily, Bobby, Eddie, and David all found each other, and their story is documented in the movie 3 Identical Strangers. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Milgram Experiment. The premise of this experiment was that they took 2 groups of people, one called teachers and one called learners, and they paired them up, one from each group. The pair couldn't see each other, but the teacher would ask the learner a question. If the learner got it wrong, the teacher was then told to give them an electric shock. Every question made the shocks get worse until an eventual fatal shock would be administered. Before the experiment, it was proposed that only 3% of the participants would go all of the way and actually give the fatal shock. But it turned out that under pressure, 65% of the teachers actually gave the lethal dose of electricity to their learner counterparts. Luckily, the students were actually just actors, so no one was truly getting hurt or shocked to death in this experiment, but it honestly is very creepy and very disturbing to see these poor people being pushed so far past their boundaries, and it's kind of unsettling to know the results. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Hofling Hospital Experiment. This experiment happened all the way back in 1966 in a time where the rules of psychological experiments were a lot more loosey-goosey. Because of this, the nurses that were all a part of this experiment had no idea that they were participants, which nowadays is very, very illegal. Basically, this experiment took place on the night shift. The night nurse would receive a phone call during the shift, and on the other end would be Dr. Smith, who's actually a researcher. He would ask the nurses to check the medicine cabinet to see if they had a drug called Astrotin, which was actually a drug that was just made up for this experiment, and it was just a placebo. The Astrotin would clearly state the maximum dosage of 10 milligrams, but Dr. Smith would ask the nurses to administer 20 milligrams. They were told that the doctor was in a hurry and he would sign all of the authorization papers as soon as he came in to see the patient later on that night. If the nurse decided to give the patient the drug, they would be breaking 3 rules. They are not allowed to accept instructions over the phone, the dose was double the maximum limit stated on the box, and the medicine itself was unauthorized. It was not on the ward stock list, so it shouldn't be in use at the hospital. Out of the 22 unknowing nurse participants, 21 of them administered the drug. That's insane. This isn't to say that the nurses were bad people or that they were bad at their job, but this experiment combined with the interviews that happened afterwards just showed how the power imbalance and the social pressures that come along with that can affect the outcome of a workplace extremely drastically, and in this case it really could have been a matter of life and death. In our number 7 spot today we have the facial expressions experiment. In 1924, a psychologist with the University of Minnesota, Carney Landis, wanted to conduct an experiment to study facial expressions. More specifically, he wanted to see if everyone's expressions of emotions were the same. Does happiness look the same on everyone? Does sadness, shock, disgust, etc. make us all react the same way facially? An interesting question for sure, but the method was strange. Basically, he recruited some student volunteers and then painted the lines of their facial muscles black. He then exposed each participant to different stimuli in order to photograph their reactions and then of course compare the results. This is all fine, except for what the stimuli actually contained. I guess this guy just really wanted big reactions because he included showing them adult films, exposing them to ammonia, making them touch reptiles, and even beheading rats. Apparently, 1/3 of the participants willingly did this beheading when told, despite not knowing how to do it humanely, and even if they did know how to do it humanely, why would you? And for the 2/3 that were regular and did not just behead a rat because a strange man told them to, unfortunately Carney did it for them. I'm not even sure what the results of this experiment were, and I have to ask, does it even matter? What an actual nightmare for something that largely just doesn't really have an impact on our lives. In our number 6 spot today we have telephone cats. Sorry to all the cat people out there, this one isn't going to be for you. In 1929, 2 scientists at Princeton University wanted to conduct an experiment in order to test how auditory nerves perceive sounds. This is obviously extremely important research, but the way they went about it is very messed up. They took a sedated but alive cat and cut out part of its brain. They then attached one end of a telephone wire to the cat's auditory nerve and the other end to a receiver. When one of these scientists spoke into the cat's ear, the other one could hear it on the other end. This is cool, but most definitely not an excuse to do something so inhumane. There were benefits of this experiment, of course, and it is believed that it may have helped lead to the development of cochlear implants, which is of course an incredibly important scientific advancement. The worst part, however, while the cat actually survived this experiment, instead of treating it like a king for the rest of its life like it truly deserved, these scientists instead killed it to see if the experiment would still work on a dead cat. It didn't. In our number 5 spot today we have the Pit of Despair. This experiment was conducted by Henry Harlow and is one of the most controversial on this list. In a sort of mental health study, Henry decided to induce depression in monkeys. He took very young monkeys and separated them from their peers and mothers and put them into isolation in a cage that was called the Pit of Despair. Sometimes the monkeys would stay there for longer, more extended periods, and other times they would be repeatedly separated and put into the cage for multiple shorter stays. These monkeys all proved to be extremely psychologically disturbed after the conclusion of this experiment, which should have seemed kind of obvious even before the experiment was conducted. These monkeys were used as a model of human clinical depression, but here's where things get even sadder than they already were. These monkeys were unable to be treated and rehabilitated. Despite various forms of treatment, they were just unable to get to a place they would have been had they not have been subject to a cruel experiment. In our number 4 spot today we have psychic driving. A part of Project MKUltra, this experiment was conducted by British psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron, who created the psychic driving concept concept that the CIA found interesting. Basically, psychic driving was a procedure that subjects patients to a continuous repeated audio loop of something that is intended to change their behavior. Basically, the patients would be exposed to hundreds of thousands of repetitions of a singular statement through the course of their treatment, and they would also be subjected to paralytic drugs that would subdue them while being exposed to this looped message. Yeah, so the CIA heard about this idea for a treatment and thought, that sounds cool. Then they started sending money to fund Cameron's experiments, but he actually didn't know it was coming from the CIA because they used a front. So Cameron's psychic driving experiments for MKUltra began to take place in Canada. I guess they said that the aim of the experiments were to get rid of or cure someone of schizophrenia by erasing existing memories and reprogramming the psyche. I'm not sure that's how schizophrenia works, but I guess they did. Cameron would subject patients to paralytic drugs and electroconvulsive therapy that was 30 to 40 times the normal power. He would also put the experiment subjects into induced comas while exposing them to the repeated audio. The experiments were mostly conducted on patients who entered the institute from more common problems like anxiety disorders or postpartum depression, and they ended up leaving with permanent effects from his actions. These included things like urinary incontinence, amnesia, being unable to speak. Some people forgot their parents and thought that the interrogators were their parents. It clearly completely altered those who were participating in these horrible and certainly unethical experiments. In our number 3 spot today, we have the UCLA schizophrenia experiments. Starting in 1983, UCLA researchers Michael Gitlin and Keith Nocherlin went to great and very unethical lengths to see just how people who were suffering from schizophrenia relapse. Basically, they were trying to figure out if there was a way to predict the relapse or a psychosis episode, and this is definitely important work that deserves attention because it could certainly have real-world benefits, but that does not mean unethical lengths should be reached. Unfortunately, this experiment involved recruiting hundreds of participants who were all being treated for schizophrenia and then taking them off of their medication. This alone has some obvious implications for the health of these people, but to make matters worse, there was no suitable plan in place for when they could return to their medication, and they also just didn't do a good enough job making sure that those participating were protected and safe given their very vulnerable state. Unfortunately, the results were disastrous and proved to be fatal when one of the participants, Antonio La Madrid, ended up taking his own life. In an article from 1994, it also says that the doctors failed to get proper informed consent from the patients as well. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Tuskegee Experiment. In the years between 1932 and 1972, there were 399 black impoverished farmers in Tuskegee, Alabama, who all had syphilis, who were recruited to participate in a free program. They were told that the program would help them treat their ailment, but of course that never happened. This experiment was conducted by people who were trying to see what would happen if the disease went untreated. Instead of treating the men with penicillin, which was the recommended treatment at the time, the men received aspirin and mineral supplements as placebos. And while this experiment was conducted to try and understand what effect the spread of disease has on the body, the unethical considerations of the scientists who conducted it proved to be absolutely fatal and just downright cruel. Out of the 399, 28 of them passed away from the disease directly, 10 passed away from complications related to the disease, 40 spouses became infected, which was then passed on to 19 others at birth whose parents had been infected. This whole situation truly is one of those times where you stop and wonder how these things were ever treated as acceptable, and really just hope that things have changed for the better. In our number 1 spot today, we have Unit 731. The Imperial Japanese Army's Unit 731 conducted some pretty horrifying experiments during World War II that certainly are shocking to anyone who hears about them. The experiments were meant to be done as a way to prepare for biological warfare, but the process was gruesome and just inhumane. Different medical schools and universities provided doctors and other research staff to help conduct these experiments, and they used both prisoners and civilians as the guinea pigs. There were a bunch of different experiments that were conducted during this time, some of which involved injecting them with pathogens such as plague or cholera or anthrax. Others involved vivisection or operations with no anesthesia, putting them in a pressure chamber to see how much a human can withstand before bursting, or even live weapons testing. It is hard to even believe that this was a real thing that happened, and we honestly can't even begin to imagine what those people were forced to face during that time.